The Secrets We Keep. Chapter 2. The Unspoken Truth. Part 1. The coastal storm battered the small stone cottage perched near the edge of Oakridge harbor. Inside, the world was reduced to the soft crackle of a stone fireplace, the faint aroma of cedar wood, and the rhythmic drumming of rain against ancient leaded glass. Julian's cottage was the exact opposite of Eleanor's pristine, minimalist London flat. Where her apartment was all brushed chrome, white marble, and cold symmetry, this space was alive with warm timber, hand-carved shelves overflowing with nautical charts, and worn leather armchairs that bore the marks of decades of quiet use. Julian walked over to the low wooden coffee table, placing a steaming ceramic mug of black tea in front of Eleanor. "Drink," he said gently. "You're shivering." Eleanor hadn't realized her hands were shaking until she tried to wrap them around the hot mug. She looked down at the dark brew, then up at Julian. He had bandaged his bruised knuckles with white linen tape, and a dry gray flannel shirt had replaced his soaked wool sweater. "Thank you," she murmured, taking a slow sip. The warmth spread through her chest, taking the edge off the freezing coastal chill that seemed to have settled into her bones. On the table between them lay the yellowed bundle of letters, untied from their faded blue ribbon. The black and white photograph of her parents propped up against the ceramic mug looked back at them, two young, smiling faces frozen in a time when life was still full of promises. "How much did your grandfather tell you before you left Oakridge?" Julian asked, taking a seat across from her on an old wooden stool, leaning his forearms on his knees. Eleanor stared at the photograph, her throat tight. "Nothing," she replied, her voice barely louder than the crackling fire. "When my parents died in that car crash in London, I was 16. Grandfather took me in, but he was always silent. Distant. Whenever I asked why my parents had moved to the city in such a hurry, why they had abandoned this town, he would just look away and say, 'Some questions only bring pain, Eleanor.'" She let out a dry, bitter laugh. "I hated him for that. I convinced myself that my father had run away because Arthur was too proud, too controlling, too stubborn to give him financial independence. I believed my father went to London to seek his own fortune and failed. That's why I worked 80-hour weeks. That's why I built Vance & Co. to be unshakable. I swore I would never let poverty or pride destroy me the way I thought it destroyed them." "Arthur wasn't proud," Julian said quietly, shaking his head. "He was terrified." "Terrified of what?" Eleanor asked, looking directly into Julian's amber eyes. "Of Richard Sterling." "Read the rest of the letter," Julian said, gesturing to the opened page on the table. "See it for yourself." Eleanor set down her tea. With trembling fingers, she picked up the letter dated September 14, 1995, the one written by her father, David Vance, just 1 week before the fatal crash on the wet roads of Surrey. She smoothed the brittle paper flat against the table and began to read aloud. "Dear Dad, if you are reading this, it means we didn't make it back from London. I know we promised to keep the truth from Eleanor until she was old enough to understand, but if something happens to us, you must tell her. The money didn't disappear because of bad investments, Dad. We didn't leave Oakridge because we wanted wealth. We left to protect the family from Sterling Enterprises. When Richard Sterling bought the Northern Harbor deeds 20 years ago, it wasn't for development. He found the original maritime charter inside the municipal archives, the charter signed by the Crown in 1842. Under that charter, the entire coastline of Oakridge, including the harbor and the cliffs where the Starlight Library stands, was granted to the Vance family in perpetuity as a public trust. The town's land cannot be legally sold or commercialized as long as a direct heir of Arthur Vance holds the deed to the Starlight Library. Richard's father forged the sale documents in the 70s. He built his entire commercial empire on stolen land. When I discovered the discrepancies in the public registry last month, Richard threatened to bankrupt the entire town. He told me if I went to the High Court, he would ensure our family lost everything including our lives. Clara and I are heading to London tonight to hand over the original copies of the 1842 Crown Charter to the Crown Registry before Sterling's lawyers can destroy the archives. If the charter is registered in the national records, Sterling can never touch Oakridge again. Protect Eleanor, Dad. Never let her know the burden she carries. And whatever happens, never let Sterling take the library. Your loving son, David. Eleanor stopped reading. The silence inside the cottage was deafening. The only sound was the howling of the wind outside, rattling the heavy timber rafters. The words swam before her eyes. Her parents hadn't abandoned Oakridge out of greed. They hadn't died chasing a shallow corporate dream. They had died on a dark, stormy highway trying to protect this very town, trying to protect the heritage that she had just spent the last 5 years of her life trying to sell to the very man who had threatened them. My whole life. Eleanor whispered, a single tear slipping down her cheek and landing on the yellowed paper. My entire career. I was working for the man who destroyed my family. Richard Sterling didn't just build an empire on stolen land, Eleanor, Julian said, his voice heavy with a profound, quiet sorrow. He manipulated you. He recruited you straight out of Cambridge Architecture School. He gave you the corner office, the 6-figure salary, the prestigious projects, because as long as you were under his thumb, believing that money was the only thing that mattered, you would willingly hand over the Starlight Library without ever asking questions. Eleanor pressed her hands against her face. The cold, impenetrable armor of Eleanor Vance, the ruthless, brilliant London architect, completely shattered in the warm glow of Julian's hearth. The grief she had buried for 12 years beneath blueprints, board meetings, and polished marble floors rushed to the surface in a wave of quiet, agonizing sobs. She didn't hear Julian stand up. She only felt the warmth of his hand resting gently on her shoulder, steady and unyielding. You didn't know, Eleanor, Julian said softly. None of this was your fault. Arthur protected you the only way he knew how, by letting you believe whatever gave you the strength to survive. Eleanor lowered her hands, wiping away the tears with the back of her sleeve. She looked up at Julian, her vision blurry but her mind sharper than it had ever been in her life. Where is the 1842 Crown Charter, Julian? She asked, her voice cracking slightly, but holding a new, steely undercurrent. Julian didn't answer right away. He looked toward the rain-streaked window facing the cliffs where the dark silhouette of the Starlight Library stood against the stormy sky. "Your father never made it to London with the original documents," Julian said quietly. "He hid them before he left. And there's only one place in Oakridge old enough, vast enough, and intricate enough to keep a royal charter hidden for 30 years. Eleanor's breath hitched. "The library," she said. Julian nodded. "The library. And we have less than 48 hours to find it before Sterling's demolition crew tears down every stone." Chapter 2, Part 1 complete.